Do you love your father?
No,
You don't love your father?
no.
And why not?
Because parenthood is a verb, it's not a noun. I mean, he was like a guy who donated some sperm, took off, and I rarely saw him, if ever.
But what did he do to you that caused you not to love him?
He failed to protect me from my mother.
So he ran from your mother, not from you. And you're right, he did fail to protect you from your mother. And that's because he was married to his mother. Your mother became his mother. And he couldn't deal with his mother, so he didn't know how to deal with your mother. And so he bailed, he left her, he didn't leave you. But your mother never said, you know what, your father loved you, but he couldn't handle me. She made you believe that she was the victim and he was the victimizer, but it wasn't true. And that's why you don't
Well,
love
and
you don't
you know,
love your father.
sorry to interrupt, but the female sort of playing the victim thing is a very, very powerful thing. And it's very,
Yes.
very hard for men to overcome that, right?
Yes.
Because, you know, if my mother was going to be honest, she would say, you know, I kind of chose the wrong guy. He probably chose the wrong woman.
Yes.
I was angry. He was angry. We kind of blew it. And, you know, now we got a kind of a wreckage of a family. It's not your fault. We made mistakes. But of course, if she was the kind of person to do that, the marriage probably wouldn't have ended to begin with. So it's this kind of, I think what you're talking about, this machinery, is like this closed loop. This
Women
is
are
how it
not
kind
going
of
to do
had to
that.
be given who they were.
Women would not do that. The hardest thing in the world for a woman to do is to admit she's wrong. She can point out everybody else, the men, the women, the cat, the dog, the grass, the paint on the house. But because of her ego, she would not admit she's wrong. She'll send you to hell before she admits she's wrong.
Well, let me just look at Hillary Clinton dragged
Yeah.
America through years of this Russia collusion conspiracy theory because she just couldn't admit that she was wrong about her reading of the American public and what they wanted.
I'm so out of time, but I got to ask you this, Stefan. Do you have a right not to love your father?
Sure.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, my formulation is love is our involuntary response to virtue if we're virtuous.
So,
And my father would need to display significant virtues, which I'm open to hearing and still within the realm of possibility, in order for me to experience the involuntary sensation of love that responds to that behavior.
is he still living?
Yes.
Have you ever asked him, why did you leave?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Uh, um, it was hard to, it's hard to get a straight answer from people with a bad conscience, as you know, right?
Yes.
And you know what? I just realized that I may not be giving you a straight answer here, which kind of puts me in that category. Not only, right? Not only people have bad conscience. So yeah, so my father has this theory of resources, that you only have a certain amount of resources that you can apply in life, and he was just out of resources. He was tired of fighting. He was tired of the combat. He couldn't work where they were because he was trained in another country. So he left, and he left for Africa, and he worked in Africa for his career. And I was not, of course, in Africa except occasionally. And so it was a whole series of impossibilities combined with his lack of emotional resources to be able to deal with the situation. That's mostly what I got out of the conversation with him. Conversations, plural.
So you feel about your father the way that your mother feel about him?
No.
Well, your mother
I do
had.
have a lot of sympathy for my father. And listen, I have a lot of sympathy for my mother too.
I
I
know,
mean,
but
she
you have
had the
not
kind of
forgiven
childhood
him.
that made Mike's look like a paradise. I mean, her entire world was burning up in the Second World War, and her entire civilization was being bombed into extinction. And her grandmother was died in bombing raids. I mean, things that I had a rough childhood, man. It was nothing like that. And
But
so I do have a lot of sympathy
but
for what
yet
my
you have
mother
not
had to
gone
go
to
through.
either one of them and forgiven them, realizing that it doesn't make it right what they did to you, but they can help it. And yet you have not gone to either one of them and forgiven them, knowing that if they could have done better, they would have. And you understand your mother's background, you understand your father's background, but yet you won't forgive them. Don't you find that interesting?
Um, it's interesting because you're like, don't judge, and she says it's interesting. I Unfortunately, or fortunately, it would break my moral standards to forgive people who haven't earned it. At the same time, sitting there stewed in anger about things in the past that can't be changed in the present is a complete waste of time and energy. So it is very, very important to come to a resolution about history to free up your energies for a more positive future. But to me, that doesn't have the moral requirement to forgive people who haven't earned it any more than I would pay someone for a job he didn't do.
Amazing. And so, do you realize the past doesn't exist except in your mind? And so, when those things happen to you, they happen then. They're not happening now, but you're reliving them by thinking it, and it feels like the past. You're still living something that doesn't exist because you won't forgive and live in the present.
Well, but you might be shoehorning me a little bit into the theory because I have broken the cycle. I've been happily married for 17 years. I'm a good dad and a stay-at-home dad. And, maybe you could say I've gone a little bit too far to the other extreme. My dad went to Africa and I barely leave the house. So, it's like maybe the pendulum swung a little bit too far, but, I think if it's swinging in the right direction, that's good.
What's the difference because of time, what's the difference between men and women? What is a man?
A man is a provider and a protector. And unfortunately, both of those roles have been usurped by the government and by a terribly toxic popular culture. Men can't protect their women anymore. We got open borders. We got rising crime rates in many areas. And men can't protect their families from terrible decisions by the government, which invite disease and debt and chaos into the environment. So men have been kind of emasculated that we can't protect. And through the welfare state, we're all becoming stepfathers involuntarily to a lot of irresponsible women. So because we have to provide for everyone else's family, or we're forced to, we can't provide for our own in many situations. So protector and provider, the two things which I think really define men, have been really bypassed by the modern state. And by that, I don't just mean the fallen state, but the government state as well.